The Social Work Planet podcast acknowledges the traditional owners of the land. We are grateful to be on this beautiful land of the people of the Kulin Nation on which we record this podcast. We pay respect to their elders, past, present, and emerging. We also recognize and respect the dignity and uniqueness of each individual. Thank you for listening, and we hope you enjoy this podcast episode.
Hi everyone, Happy New Year, and welcome to the second episode of the Social Work Planet podcast. I'm Erica Lloyd. Today, Veronica and I are so happy to have social worker Susan Marryatt with us.
Happy New Year, everyone. So Susan is currently the team leader of a women's counseling program within a public hospital. She also has her own private practice in counseling. Susan previously worked as a drug and alcohol counselor. Welcome to our podcast, Susan. How are you today?
Thank you very much for having me here. I'm well and happy to be here with you two lovely young women talking about social work, one of my favorite topics. And thank you for inviting me on. It's a great honor.
Oh, it's our pleasure to have you here on our podcast. We are so elated to have you today sharing about your social work journey with us and our listeners. Would you like to start off by sharing with us a little bit about yourself and your journey to becoming a social worker?
Yes, definitely. I was thinking about this over the last week and, wondering where was that point where I actually decided to become a social worker. But I think a few things nudged me in this direction. Mm-hmm. And firstly, I grew up in New Zealand, so I'm not a native of Australia, but I've been here a very long time. And over there, I came from a family of nurses, and my dad was a veterinarian, so animal doctor. And what I got from my family, from the adults who raised me, was the idea, the value, I guess, that if you were educated and in a position of privilege, it was your obligation to help out people who were disadvantaged and to do what you could to lift other people up. So that was something that my parents, I guess, raised me with that value. And the women in my family were very strong, caring women. They were very clever and resourceful. They were the sort of women that, made things happen. And I found that very inspiring over the years. Like, I've looked to my mother and my aunties, and even my grandmothers, in terms of their spirit and their resilience. And it's kind of funny looking back now how my mum and my aunties, they worked hard as nurses, okay? And they smoked, all of them, they smoked and drank a bit of alcohol to cope, as you did back in the 60s and the 70s. But they gave a lot to their patients. Yeah. And when actually, my mum actually is Australian and grew up here in Victoria. But when my mum and dad married and settled in New Zealand, mum chose not to continue paid work as a nurse. She was a highly trained certificated nurse, but she decided that for the 40 odd years or so of married life, she decided to do volunteer nursing and social work, what I would now call social work. She didn't name it as that at that time. It was just volunteer work in the community, and she did everything from food bank to nursing dying people at hospice to women's refuge work to even teaching literacy in prisons to offenders, to criminals. So she had this amazing career as a volunteer social worker. And I think that really influenced me, seeing her doing that very meaningful work in the community and hearing those stories. She was a real inspiration to me. Yeah. And I also, really want to acknowledge that even though, she was white, middle class and educated, she could relate to people from all walks of life. And I was able to observe how she did that. She genuinely cared, and she saw the good in people.
Yeah.
And so that was how it kind of started. And at first I thought I would study nursing, like my mum and my grandma and my aunties, after school. But I worked for 2 years as a nursing assistant in aged care, and this was back in the early 80s. And I found the attitude of some of the doctors in aged care at that time pretty appalling when it came to, patient-focused care. It really wasn't patient-focused care. And I sort of thought, I want to help people in their struggles, but there must be another path where the care can be individualized and empowering for the person.
Yeah.
And I think, after that, I moved from New Zealand to Australia as a young person. I worked and saved some money for travel. Didn't actually go to uni until I was 22. So that was considered a mature age student by that time, at the tender age of 22. But before I went to uni, I was lucky to travel around for a year in Europe.
Oh.
And that was amazing. Back in 1989, amazing year in Europe. The wall opened and there were really big things happening politically in Europe. And I got to meet all kinds of people and see how they lived. And, I guess I was fascinated by communities, different cultures, different communities, and how they took care of their disadvantaged folk. People did that in different ways. And so then, upon my return to Melbourne, initially I studied a bachelor degree in psychology. So I started sort of on the psychology track. That was specialising in disability studies. And then later I did my Bachelor of Social Work at Monash Uni. I worked for a while, initially in sort of disability services with what was then the Department of Human Services, and kind of did case management and that sort of work. And then I sort of worked alongside social workers in that role. And I was really inspired by them and the way that they thought about these clients that we're working with, and the kind of external factors, the like ecological factors that contributed to these people, not having a job, or the fact they had a disability and they couldn't achieve certain things, not because of the disability, but because of the way the social barriers that were in place for them. And the more I kind of joined in these conversations and heard about how social workers saw these problems, and that they could try and tackle them at a number of levels, not just change the person, that really inspired me. And I decided to then go off and do my Bachelor of Social Work. And later on, I did postgraduate training in counselling, family therapy and psychotherapy. And that kind of moved me into becoming a counsellor. So, so in a nutshell, that was kind of how I came to be working in this field.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing, Susan. That's a really inspiring journey. Like hearing from you about your family values and the positive influence from your mother, grandmother, and your aunties, and your early traveling and working experiences, and then becoming a social worker yourself. That's really amazing. So I'm thinking, like, after you graduate with your Bachelor of Social Work, how did your social work journey go, and how did you enter different fields of social work practice?
Yes. Yeah, thanks, Erica. Yeah, well, gosh, again, when I thought about this and looked at my resume, I thought, gosh, I've worked in so many sectors. Is there one I haven't worked in? Mainly here in Victoria. But I also did 2 years community social work over in New Zealand. So I popped back there to live for a couple of years. But basically, after, as I mentioned before, after I finished my psychology degree, which majored in disability studies, I started off with DHS. Then, while still with the department, I moved into permanent care and later on foster care. So that was one area. It was adoption and permanent care at that time, and then foster care. And during my social work training, I did a group work placement. I was really interested in the idea of group work. And so I did a placement in a community health service and did a lot of work in the men's behaviour change program. So this really kind of introduced me to family violence work. And ultimately I went on to do women's family violence counselling and run support and education groups for women for many years, as well as doing the men's behaviour change. And so I really got quite immersed in the family violence sector and worked there for many years and enjoyed that work, particularly the group work. It's something that I really appreciate, that mode of when you get a group of people together who are struggling with similar things and sort of, dealing with the same sort of issue in their lives, how they can resource and support each other. And, you need to set up the space and facilitate, but often the group energy takes on a life of its own. And I can often honestly say, if anyone's interested in group work, I mean, men's behaviour change work in some ways is cutting edge. It's the most challenging group work, as you can imagine, that you'll do as a facilitator, and particularly if you're a female facilitator, where they always have a male and a female facilitating, so that team of facilitators can model respectful communication between men and women. That's really important. But also you're the only woman in that room, and these men are, often when they come in, angry men who don't have a lot of respect for women. So it's really amazing work to do, and obviously you want to be well supported in the work and supervision and all that, but I learned so much about family violence from both sides of the issue, and I think that really helped me a lot in my work. So from after that, by that stage I was in an NGO, so I wasn't no longer at the department, but working in quite a well-known NGO, and I took a detour out of family violence into parenting education. And got a job working on a statewide project for 2 years, which was rolling out the Signpost parenting program across the eastern region. And for each region of Victoria, they needed a regional coordinator to oversee the rollout of that program, to train up practitioners such as teachers and early intervention workers and social workers, case managers, who would then deliver this parenting program to the parents they were working with, who would be parents of children with disabilities. So yeah, that was an amazing opportunity. It was a wonderful project, very well funded, and had a very wide scope. And I guess that was, probably the first time I stepped up as a, in a more sort of management type role as a regional coordinator, and really loved that. And I guess as I sort of run through some examples from my career path, what people might notice is that I did a lot of short-term gigs in terms of, 1-year projects or 2-year projects. And for me, that's actually really worked. I always think, variety, it's the spice of life, and it's no different in our work sort of life. And the longest I ever stayed anywhere was 8 years. And I'm now sort of clocking up it's over 30 years, probably about 33 years now. And I moved, and many, as I said, I had, a project maybe for 12 months or for 2 years, the one I just mentioned. So I really enjoyed moving around. I really enjoyed developing a wide range of skill sets. And, not everyone wants to do that, but for me, it worked really well. And it's also, helped me get other jobs because I have tried a wide range of things and done pretty well with them. So later in my career, I did a lot of, so I guess it was, case management and support work, and then project work. And later on, I got very interested in counselling. And I always felt like that was kind of my true calling, if you like, to be a counsellor, to provide that therapeutic space for clients. And I was working in a community health counselling team at one point, and around that time I wanted to increase my my training in the area. So I did a postgraduate training, 2-year postgraduate training in family therapy and psychotherapy, and that was really helpful to deepen my counselling skill sets. Because, it is a specialised area of social work. I think a lot of social workers who do support work, there's a component of counselling, but, you can go much deeper. And I guess there's so many different modalities of counselling too, so you can choose what suits you best and what works with your particular style. In 2011, I began to dip my toes into the private practice waters.
Yeah.
And since that time, I've had a small counselling practice running alongside a part-time role in an organisation.
Yeah.
And again, I found this combination of, working for an organisation and sort of, guaranteed hours per week, with also running my own counselling practice, where you've got to go out and find the work and get referrals, but you have a lot more capacity for, seeing a wider range of clients, and I guess, being more creative in the work. That really suited me well, to have all those ingredients in my working life. Really encourage social workers later down the track, when they've got some experience under their belt, to consider registering as a mental health social worker. I guess after you've had 2 to 3 years experience working in a mental health setting of some kind, because you do need that for accreditation. But once you register as a mental health social worker through the AASW, you can become a Medicare provider. So that means that Medicare will, offer a rebate for the counselling sessions that you provide. So yeah, that's how a lot of social workers get set up in private practice with counselling. So what else did I want to say? That, I spent, in more recent times, I spent 7 years working as an alcohol and drug counsellor. Again, that was probably my second longest time in, a particular sector or with a particular organisation. And at first, I worked on helplines, and then later face-to-face work at the clinic. And that's another thing I discovered as well, like, because I was a face-to-face counsellor, for most of my work career up to that point, I sort of thought, helpline counselling, it's kind of, support and referral, how deep do you go? But I have to say, I learned some really great counselling skills doing telephone counselling, and really learn to listen to the sort of subtleties of a person's communication, and pick up on the subtle nuances, and also you can do some very deep work when someone is an anonymous caller. It's just the way it works. Sometimes they'll open up to you in a way that they perhaps haven't opened up to other face-to-face support people. So that was a wonderful experience, and again recommend telephone counselling to any social workers who are keen to try that out. So working for that same organisation in AOD, I also began supervising other social workers and became the social work stream leader for my division. It was quite a big organisation. There were different divisions. And that was, really good to have those stream meetings and to be able to support and mentor, new social workers. And of course, we had the student placements, and which I'll say that's where I met Erica as a social work student. And and that's a nice space to be in too when you're, when you've got some years experience under your belt. The program that I worked in that AOD service, it was a specialised AOD service for Aboriginal and culturally diverse people. And these typically were people who were slipping through the service cracks with their alcohol and drug issues. They weren't kind of fitting into the mainstream AOD service system, if you like, and they had very complex needs and trauma. And so we would, do a combination of things like outreach and telephone counselling and, making sure they could access, the addictions clinic and rehab and so on, detox and rehab, in order to help those people get the support they needed. And and that was wonderful work too. And I've really enjoyed working with culturally diverse communities around Melbourne and learnt a lot from those communities. And then finally this year I changed again and gained a position at a major hospital, as you've said, and as the team leader of a women's counselling program. So where I do lots of different things, and I can talk about what my typical day looks like, but moving up to the team leader level, you're really supporting and mentoring the rest of the team, and making sure that the program is ticking along and providing, I guess, a quality service. And in particular, so we work only with women, but women that have experienced violence and trauma in this particular program.
Wow. Oh, that's honestly such a vast social work experience that you've had, Susan. Like, it's so great to hear your journey from the very beginning and at where you are right now. It's amazing to also see the different fields of practices there is within the social work field of practice. And it's also so great to hear your different experiences that you've had in the different fields as well. Something that comes up in my mind is how did you find when you were changing from one field of practice to another? For example, when you moved from the disability sector to the foster care sector, were there some specifically related experiences required by the employer?
Yeah, it's a good question, Veronica. Thank you. And it's interesting, sometimes opportunities just come up even within your own organisation. Look, I have to say, in terms of landing work and positions, it's not what you know, it's who you know, the old saying goes. And that goes a long way if people actually know you and have worked with you or supervised you or know your work. They will often, call you and say, hey, there's this vacant position on our team. Are you interested, sort of thing? So some of those transitions I made within the one organisation, like, for example, that back in DHS, that's where I transitioned from disability services to adoption and permanent care. They also had child protection, they had housing, they had mental health teams, so there was, in a big organisation, there's room to move around, right? And a lot of our big public health networks offer that as well. And other times I guess when I would go for a position in a new area that I hadn't worked in, I would try and find out if I could talk to a contact in that area, and sort of suss out, okay, what does that program do? What's the core philosophy and the approaches? I would read their website. I'd really study up. And now that I sit on the other side of the recruitment panel and I'm interviewing staff for our program, I really want to get out there to do your research on the program, know about the job you are applying for. I mean, there is the position description for sure, and that's a really good guide, key selection criteria, right? But also, if it's completely new to you, look, do your homework, do your research, try and find a colleague or a friend of a friend who might work in that area, pick their brains. But I often, I winged it a lot of times at those interviews, but I did do my research, so I kind of knew the philosophy, I knew the approaches, and I think I was quite good at transferring my skill sets into the setting. Like I would say, oh yeah, that's, it's case management. I've done that in disability services, and, there are, 3 steps to that. And, and so I would, I just prepared. I didn't get every job I interviewed for, but I've certainly been quite successful over the years. And I think it's, it's like anything in life. If you do your homework and prepare for it, you're going to have a much stronger chance.
Yeah.
But if you miss out on that interview, like that position, then always call the manager afterwards, or when they call you to say, sorry, you haven't been successful, always ask them, okay, can you give me some feedback from my interview? Why didn't you give me the job? You've got nothing to lose, and I would just ask that in a polite way, and they're usually more than happy to give you feedback. And quite often it's the case of, look, we've just, you did very well, blah, 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 on these areas, but we just had this person apply who has actually worked in this direct program before, or this program type, and they just had a little bit more direct experience. And then it's not me, I'm not doing anything terribly wrong, but somebody had a bit more experience than me, so I think that's important as a motivation and a self-esteem thing, to sort of ask for feedback if you haven't been successful. And don't, you have to get to the interview first, and for some positions, they can have a huge number of applications. Yeah. So, don't be disheartened. I guess that's my main message. Keep trying, and if it's not quite a good fit right now, get some experience or some training in the area, and then come back again and try again later down the track.
It's really good tips from you, Susan. And it's very important because sometimes as new social workers, we may worry about choosing between different social work fields of practice. So that's very helpful tips for us. This has been a really wonderful conversation so far. In the interest of time, we will have the second part of the interview with Susan released next Saturday, in which we will dive deeper into what a day-to-day looks like for Susan as a team leader in a women counseling program. Susan will be also sharing some of the highlights and challenges in her social work career. She will also share some amazing tips for social work students and social workers in their early careers. So stay tuned and see you next week.
Happy
New Year, everyone.